प्रणति प्रणति प्रणति
మాట్లాడదాం అసలు స్టార్ట్. స్టార్ట్ చేద్దామా? Good morning all. It's my pleasure inviting you all to take part in the national webinar on Fourth World Literature. Thank you for the participants, those who have shown a great deal of enthusiasm and interest on this national webinar. It's my pleasure inviting you all to Krishna University Department of English to join the webinar. Now it's time for, it's almost 10:30. The session starts now with the prayer song of Krishna University. Thank you so much.
प्रणति 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 कृष्णा विश्वविद्यालयम सकल साहित्य कला संभवितमा अतुलित शास्त्रीय ज्ञान सारमा सृजन शोधन विषय भाण्डारमा विषय भाण्डारमा प्रणति 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 कृष्णा विश्वविद्यालयम सकल साहित्य कला संभरितमा अतुलित शास्त्रीय ज्ञान सारमा सृजन शोधन विषय भाण्डारमा विषय भाण्डारमा सिद्धेन्द्रुनि नाट्यं क्षेत्रय्यनि पदहेल विश्वनाथ कविताचरि कविराजुनि हेतु मुसडि SVR हावभावन अक्किनेनि यशमुतीरु सीतेरायुनि क्रीड वेंपटि नर्तन परिणति पट्टाभि मुट्नूरि कोपल्लेल सेवनिरति పట్నపు నేల సాహితీ పరిమళంబు దివిసీమన వెలసినట్టి మత్స్య సంపద రీతులు కొల్లేటిన నర్తించిన ప్రకృతి అందాల మొయలు నూజివీడు రసములొలుగు ఆహ్లాదపు రుచుల తీరు కొండపల్లి బొమ్మ రూపు పెడన కలంకారి తీరు విపణి రంగపు తిట్ట జయ విజయవాడ ప్రతిభ నీ సొగసులే కదా నీ ఆహార్యములే. కృష్ణ జలతరంగిణి వేణుగాన మాధుర్యం కృష్ణమిట్టిలో వెలసిన రూపలావణ్య తగలు కృష్ణ కాంతులం విరియు హరివిల్లుల జ్ఞానజ్యుతులు కృష్ణ గాలితో కూడిన అనుభూతుల పరిమళాలు కృష్ణ మోహనందు వెలయు జీవన గీతాసారము అర్థమరయ అన్వేషణ నిరతము కొనసాగింతుము నీ యశో విభవంబును వాడవాడ చాటింతుము నీ యశో విభవంబును వాడవాడ చాటింతుము.
Thank you all. It's my pleasure inviting Registrar Krishna University to deliver inaugural address. Thank you, sir. Now I would like to invite Professor K. Krishna Reddy Garu, Registrar Krishna University, Machilipatnam, to address the gathering. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Kotesh Rao Garu. Indeed, it is my pleasure and my bounded duty as a registrar of Krishna University on behalf of our Vice Chancellor, sir, Professor K.B. Chandrasekhar Garu. Today, I am giving the inaugural speech. At the outset, I congratulate the Department of English, the faculty, and in particular, Dr. M. Kotesh Rao Garu, convener of this webinar on elucidating the ancient wisdom and universalism in fourth world literature is one of the relevant to the global society and also to the Andhra Pradesh, as the vision and mission of the government of Andhra Pradesh is looking for English medium right from the LKG to higher education. I am also profusely thankful to the today's eminent speakers, Professor Rajashekhar Garu, Vice Chancellor, full additional charge, and also Professor of English, Acharya Nagarjuna University, is a man with a lot of fascination towards the academics and research and administration. I hope you will learn many things from him. That will be a treasure of, from him we may get many things. And equally, I profusely thank Professor S. Armstrong Garu, Professor Head, Department of English, Ancient Madras University. See, these both persons are going to give you the contemporary literature. What are the changes happening in particular English language? So the change in the language, usage of the idioms, usage of the words, usage and changes in the spellings, and the differences between the Britishers, Americans, and the Latin American English and the third world English. These are all is in different entities, different way of giving the grammar and different way of looking the language and literature. So among all the literatures, English literature has its own importance on the globe due to the large populations speaking language. To have the better communication, to have the better prospects for a country and for the well-being of the society, we need to go through the one of the familiar language in all the nations, so that is the English. So, dear participants, so this is one of the better occasion for us to go into deeper insight in the English language and learn how to propaganda this language to among our folks, among our wards, and also to the society. As a teacher, it is our bounded and customary duty to impart the English language to our fellow citizens through this literature. So if you see the Shakespeare, if you see the John Milton, those languages can be understood by the professionals. If you can simplify them, that's why we read those things in the as a part of our curriculum. But for a common man, that is not going to understand so easily. So one has to make it much more simplification, simplified sentences. Then what they have preached, what were those circumstances, how to convert those circumstances, and now how to contemplate those things for the present relevant society. So that is the one of the crux of this webinar. Really, we have to appreciate the Department of English for choosing a relevant topic today for debate, and hope these two eminent scholars lectures will enlighten the importance of the literature, particularly ancient literature, with the fourth eye. Definitely, we can bring more research, fundamental research, and along with that, the Krishna University may get some of the inputs for starting the incubation center for in our place. Our Vice Chancellor sir has the dream to have two incubation centers. One is for the arts, literature, and management. Another one is the basic and advanced sciences and technology for the science students. So if really we can able to establish these two incubation centers, this center can provide the forum for debates, discussions, and also getting the fellowships and publications that will definitely foster the good work, in particularly in English. So, friends, I hope all of you may get a good knowledge through these couple of lectures. I have to say one thing. When I was a kid, we don't have a English medium for us until 10th class. So we have to go through the normal schooling. But after 10 plus 2, we have to learn. It is forced to learn. Sometimes many of us feel bit uncomfortable to learn the language, especially the present modern society wards. The kids are not able to cope up with the advancement of the English literature. I personally feel, and what I preached, maybe relevance or irrelevance, I don't know, but what I used to do is, I used to take, on those days we don't have internet, I used to take the dictionary and I used to learn 5 to 7 words in a day. If you learn 5 to 7 words in a day, in a year you can get more than 1,500 plus. You can able to at least understand, you cannot make a sentence, but you can able to understand the meaning of the Hindu paper. But if you can go on practicing and go on talking, and if you go on writing, definitely you can learn better English, and we should have a courage, and we should have the determination, we should have the passionation, we should have the hard working disciplined timetable. If you can make it, definitely we can learn the language. Indians are experts of learning any language, any foreign language, apart from their own mother tongue. So, dear participants, I am pretty sure that today the 2 lectures given by eminent scholars, Professor Rajshekhar Garu, Professor Armstrong Garu, will be a starting point for the Krishna University to start an incubation center in the literature, and with this we can look for the currency, for the financial support from the ICSSR and ICMR, and also some extent from Ministry of Health Science. We can able to establish one incubation research center for the arts. The other one will be the Bandar Research Center, that is exclusively for fundamental and advanced research in the field of science and technology. So I once again congratulate the Department of English on behalf of our Vice Chancellor, Professor K.V. Chandrasekhar Garu. I congratulate the Department of English for taking a relevant topic, contemporary topic now, and also bringing 2 eminent scholars for this webinar. And I sincerely wish for the best of luck, and hoping for the few more such webinars in a near future, near endeavors. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Kotesh Rao Garu. I now hand over the mic to Kotesh Rao Garu.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Your valuable words, and you encourage the fraternity of English in general and the Department of English, Krishna University in particular. Thank you, sir, for your inaugural address. Thank you so much. Now I invite Dr. K. Narasimha Rao Garu to give introduction about the speaker, Professor Rajshekhar Garu, Vice Chancellor of Acharya Nagarjuna University Department of English. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Very good morning to all the attendees, esteemed faculty, research scholars, and students who have joined today. It gives me immensely pleasure to welcome you all a 2-day national webinar on elucidating the ancient wisdom and universalism in Fourth World literatures, organized by the Department of English, Krishna University, Machilipatnam, Andhra Pradesh. It is a great pleasure to introduce today's honorable speaker, Dr. Rajshekhar Patteti, Professor of English and Vice Chancellor of Acharya Nagarjuna University. He did MA English from Andhra University and qualified UGC NET JRF in December 1991. He did MPhil on West Indian literature and PhD on Canadian literature from Central University of Hyderabad. He has 25 years of teaching experience in universities and 45 PhDs with foreign education, and 70 MPhils degrees are awarded under his guidance. He organized 3 international and 2 national seminars as a director. He authored 4 books on Fourth World literatures. He published 30 articles in national and international journals. He delivered 46 lectures as a resource person in different universities in India. He is a life member of Indian Association for Canadian Studies, Indian Association of Commonwealth Literature and Languages, Indian Association for the Study of Australian Literature, Indian Association for the Australian Literature, IASAL. He received Best Research Award for presenting the paper in the International Conference in Abroad for the year 2007 by Acharya Nagarjuna University. He received Best Research Paper Award published in the National Journal for the year 2009 by the Acharya Nagarjuna University. Sir received Best Research Paper Award for presenting a paper in the International Conference in Australia, University of Sydney in 2010 by Acharya Nagarjuna University. He was selected for Indo-Canadian Faculty Enrichment Award in 2012 by International Council for Canadian Studies, University of Toronto, Toronto, Canada. He visited University of Manitoba, Canada, University of Sydney, Australia, University of Oklahoma, United States of America, Oxford University, United Kingdom to present papers in seminars. He is the editor-in-chief of an international peer-reviewed journal on the cultures and literary nationalism of fourth world. He held administrative positions in Acharya Nagarjuna University, such as HOD of the department, assistant chief teacher, associate for degree exams, coordinator of UGC NET coaching, coordinator of distance education study center, coordinator of equal opportunity cell, CTA for distance PG spot valuation, coordinator of UG examinations, registrar, and now he is the vice chancellor of Acharya Nagarjuna University. Under his vice chancellorship, the university topped nearly 25 national and international rankings. It has become the first public university in the country to enter the Indian Book of Records in rankings and to get prestigious QS LEED certificate. Under his outstanding performance of administration, the university has made its place in Asia Book of Records as Grand Master. Thank you, sir, for accepting to deliver a lecture on representation and contestation in fourth world literatures. Now over to Dr. M. Koteswara, Webinar Director, to give introductory remarks.
Narasimha Garu, thank you so much for introducing the eminent speaker, Professor Rajshekhar Garu. So what cannot be listed by Dr. K. Narasimha Rao Garu, and I would like to say a few words about Rajshekhar Garu. So sir's matchless candor, astounding sincerity, a remarkable spontaneity, confidence ardor to see things go smoothly. I think these are a few of those defining traits of Professor Rajshekhar sir that I came across in my communication with Professor Rajshekhar sir. So hundreds of participants are waiting for his speech. So now I would like to give an introductory remarks as a theme of the seminar. Thank you all for joining with in this webinar. Across the globe, ethnicity has become the primary concern of all the disciplines of knowledge. Ethnicity has provided a space for the recognition and consolidation of native identities. Decolonial or post-colonial and new literatures in regional languages in particular, and in English language, English in general, succinctly escaped from the accusation of being pedagogic by circumscribing native literary studies into its purview. So the social and political identities of natives find a significant resonance in native literatures. It is pertinent to observe that the extraordinary diversity of the subjective positions of natives across the world creates the confluence of narratives. The discourse of native literature is not a new phenomenon. It has always been presented, and it is the genesis of human civilization. Native literatures have dismantled and conventionally recorded history and enforced this theme of reaching back in time. This has exposed the propositions of prehistorians and colonizers in constructing stereotyped images of natives as primitive, savage, and childlike, and so on and so on. As the perception of the society is constructed by the created images, native literatures have distorted and dismantled these constructions. Native literatures have led to the constant questioning of the epistemological dimensions of the writer's process of indigenization. It is due to the unavoidable influence of native literatures, the world is becoming conscious of native concerns. So the objective of this webinar is to focus on the native literary productions by bringing together both national and international scholars engaged in the field of fourth world literary studies and addressing the issues of ancient wisdom and universalism from literary cultural, historical, and ethno-political perspectives. It also aims to create a platform for an ongoing engagement in the respective fields that can further the process of research and dialogue. I once again would like to thank all the participants showing a great enthusiasm. This kind of dialogue is very, very important. In this regard, I'm really thankful to Professor K. Chandrasekhar sir, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Krishna University, because of he has encouraged the Department of English in particular and all the faculties in general to conduct and organize webinars like this. Thank you, of course. Because of his hectic schedule, Sir Professor Chandrasekhar sir, Vice Chancellor of Krishna University, could not attend to this webinar. Of course, his encouragement and inspiration is always behind Department of English in particular and all the faculties and Krishna University in general. Thank you, sir. Now I would like to invite Professor Rajshekhar sir, Department of English and Vice Chancellor of Acharya Nagar University, to deliver his valuable words and present his speech. Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
So, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Krishna University, Professor Chandrasekhar, Honorable Registrar of the University, Professor Krishna Reddy Garu, who just gave a good beginning for this webinar in the absence of the Vice Chancellor, and the Director of this webinar, Dr. Koteshwar Rao, and the professors in the Department of English of Krishna University, Professor Usha and Professor Dilip and Dr. Narsimha Rao, and to my students and scholars who are participating in this webinar. On behalf of the university, I extend, on behalf of the University Acharya Nagarjuna University, I extend a warm welcome to you, and I pay my gratitude to the Department of English of Krishna University in general, and particularly to the director of the webinar, Dr. Koteshwar Rao. So I'm just astray almost since a year in the position of FAC Vice Chancellor, burying the books and keeping aside the literary information that I carry in my mind all the time. So since 2 or 3 days, I've been shivering and I've been trying to recuperate the information from different sources to deliver this lecture. It's because the seminar is on Fourth World Literatures. It is on celebrating or elucidating ancient wisdom and universalism on Fourth World Literatures. Fourth World Literatures, since a decade, remain to be the explored subject or continues to be the subject of exploration in Acharya Nagarjuna University. I think it all began with our seminar in 2009, understanding and exploring Fourth World Literatures, where we succeeded in inviting a few important native writers. I think it is in that conference that we struggle to define what Fourth World Literature is. So I need to talk about the fundamentals of Fourth World Literature, because the very introduction of Fourth World Literature continues to remain only in Acharya Nagarjuna University. But of course, some of the scholars who got their research degrees in Fourth World Literature are doing well within their personal sphere, trying to continue the spirit of Fourth World Literatures in their lectures and in their personal research, Still, it has to be introduced to other universities, and it needs to be completely understood by the young scholars. I think knowing fourth world literatures is knowing oneself, is knowing thyself. If I can make you understand my own personal journey with literature, or my own way of trying to come to terms in defining myself, you will obviously agree that fourth world literature is a self exploratory exercise. It's an exercise which has to be carried out internally by every young scholar and academician. I think my journey, my realization of fourth world literature began way back in 2009. I think completing my research in West Indian literature for MPhil, and a Jewish Canadian literature for PhD, and teaching for 6 years Commonwealth literature with African poetry, Canadian poetry, Indian poetry as specializations in the University of Kerala of Trivandrum for 6 years, and trying to teach poetics of fiction and theory of literature or literary criticism from the perspective of race and caste, went on unabatedly till I joined Acharya Nagarjuna University in 2002 as associate professor. So with the same zeal and with the same academic temperament, without any inhibition, I have carried out my teaching without any hesitation, almost encouraging the students to the best of my ability, teaching Victorian literature, American literature, and making the scholars to do research in African literature, Afro-American literature, making them to understand the parallels, the paradigm shifts that are happening in literature, from the study of race to the study of caste, etc., was being done by me very religiously and piously, and I confined myself in understanding literature to the portals of African literature, Ngugi wa Thiong'o's works, or Ol Soyinka's poetry, or all the important African writers and poets, and Afro-American writers like James Baldwin, Richard Wright, as you know, W.B. Du Bois, his Souls of Black Folk, and Malcolm X, Phyllis Wheatley, and Booker T. Washington, Ralph Ellison, James Baldwin, Richard Wright. All these Afro-American writers, they are part of our teaching, part of my initiation into the field of research to my scholars, and then making them to understand the seriousness of literature in terms of expressing the aspect of race in literature, and trying to draw parallels between race and caste, trying to win the attention of the students towards understanding the significance of deciphering the aspect of caste in Indian literature, or trying to compare the dialectics of caste with the dialectics of race, or making the students to understand post-colonial criticism in the light of Franz Fanon, Edward Said, as I said, A.B. Caesar and W.B. Du Bois, and other people, or making them to understand Said's Orientalism, or culture and imperialism, or Bill Ashcroft's, Helen Tiffin and Bill Ashcroft's the empire writes back. So this was a kind of theoretical consolidation of literature related to race and caste, which went on quite for some time. So it happened way back in 2007 when I went to US to attend Native American Indigenous Council meet. Native American Indigenous Council meet. So in that council meet, but of course I had a few friends from India also. Professor Armstrong was there along with me, and some professors from India came to US, and we were specially invited. And we were exempted from paying the registration fee also after putting up a requisition, saying that we can bear travel expenditure, and our university gives the travel expenditure to some extent, and you have to exempt us from paying registration fee. So the organizers of the conference in 2007, Robert Warrior, a popular Native American writer, Craig S. Womack, a popular Native American critic, and a few more people, they came to our rescue and invited us wholeheartedly, making us to understand their culture, their situation, and their writings. I think it is in that Indigenous Council meet in 2007, I developed the idea that the true parallel reading between Dalit literature and Native American literature is an apt thing. A genuine exploration, a genuine understanding of the conditions of the natives in America and Dalits are the downtrodden people in India is very, very essential. And all these days, most of the departments of English in India, they were very seriously trying to construct the parallels between race and caste, making a comparative study of Afro-American and African writers with Dalit writers and regional Dalit writers. I mean, I think Dalit literature was also trying to slowly come up, and already by the time it has made substantiative inroads in the departments of literature. When we were students, Dalit literature was not much talked about. It was a prohibited subject. By the time we consolidated ourselves in the teaching, Dalit literature has become one of the branches of literature which was essentially being talked about. I'm talking about 2007 and 2008 situation, and the way that made us to come out with the concept of fourth world literature, the evolution of the concept of fourth world literatures. So I thought that, to know the nation is to know the original inhabitants of the nation. To know the nation is to know its people. And to proclaim nationalism is to understand the first people of the nation. Proclamation of nationalism do not lie in expressing phonetically or enthusiastically our admiration and adulation towards the national symbols. I think patriotism has become the burden for the middle class people, and only the middle class people are expected to carry the cartloads of patriotism, and middle class people knew only the ways of expressing patriotism phonetically, with a kind of enthusiasm and with a kind of eccentricism. So then I understood that. I think even from the post-colonial critics, we understand that these are the concocted symbols. I think in the beginning of the 20th century, to invite the participation of the large-scale masses into independence struggle, our forefathers, our Indian, independent leaders our leaders of India's independent movement, they have created symbols in order to invite the psychological binding of the masses towards understanding patriotism. I think it is from there you get the ideas of national flag, national bird, national animal, etc., etc. I mean, if you can slightly think about pre independent India's national struggle or pre-colonial movements vis-a-vis the post-colonial cultural commercial movements which are going on, we will be able to understand that the expression of patriotism always tied with worshipping the concocted symbols which are burdened to carry the meaning of nationalism or the meaning of nation or the heritage of the nation or the tradition of the nation. So, I mean, in this process, every nation after post-colonial movements, after achieving political independence, many of the third world countries or many of the first world nations or many of the second world nations almost buried the first people of their nations. I think they were almost forgotten. They were not properly, considered even as human beings also. I think that's where you link Robert Warrior's literary and cultural nationalism of America. And that's one of the popular books by Robert Warrior, the literary and cultural nationalism of America. So participation in that conference has made me to think on these lines, and I started reading and trying to understand who these natives are. So if you read the history of America, you have first inhabitants of America called as natives of America. If you read the history of Canada, you have first inhabitants of Canada who are considered as First Nations in Canada. If you read the history of Australia, you know the first living people of Australia are considered as Aboriginal people. And if you read the history of New Zealand, the first people who lived in New Zealand are considered as Maoris. So every nation has this history of the first people who lived in that nation. Okay. I mean, let's not go into the details from where these first people have come in to these nations. I think there are some theories which are there, some Bering Strait theory, or some theories are there, but people are contesting against those theories. But if we can try to understand the evolution of human history by taking into consideration the first people who have lived in those respective nations, we will be able to arrive at an understanding that these people considered to be the first inhabitants of the respective nations were completely forgotten. I think you call it as colonization. You consider that as a colonization of America, the history of the colonization of America by the Europeans, or the history of colonization of Canada by Europeans and by Americans, or the history of colonization of Australia by, again, the Europeans, the Britishers and the Americans who went to Australia and who completely obliterated the living evidences of the Aboriginal people, but who failed completely in eliminating the Aboriginal people to some extent. So in the light of this recognition towards understanding the history of the First Nations, the history of the first living people of these countries has made me to think about the origin of Dalits in India, has made me to think about the origin of tribes in India, the origin of Adivasis in India. And I was trying to understand the fourth world identity, the fourth world categorization. We made an attempt in 2009 to extend fourth world identity to Dalits and tribes of India. I think that's where our first international seminar on Fourth World literatures began. So when we invited writers from US, I mean First Nation writers, because I was very, very particular that only First Nation writers from Canada or Native American writers and poets from US and Aboriginal writers from Australia and Maori writers from New Zealand need to be invited. And we I mean, implemented that, and we had a good participation of these writers and poets from the Aboriginal communities. So when we started making them to understand that you need to extend the definition of fourth world identity to Dalits and tribes of India also, they were also surprised. They were surprised, and I mean, considering our presentations, considering our parallel studies, and trying to understand the seriousness behind our research, they got themselves convinced. They got convinced and began, propagating in their countries. Began, I mean, educating their people. There are also First Nations in India, and they are called as Dalits, tribes, or Adivasis, or etc., etc. Okay. Of course, the extended identity from the tribal identity is Dalit identity. We cannot say that tribes, Adivasis, and the so-called Dalit communities are different. Obviously not. Okay. In the beginning, there are tribes in India, there are Adivasis in India, and these Adivasis who moved from the forest-dwelling places, who moved from forest-dwelling communities, who got themselves educated in the longer run, are considered to be called as, or being called as Dalits. Of course, Dalit is an ideological term. I don't have to, explain the meaning of Dalit. And the constitutional term is scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. And the constitutional status do not separate, do not bestow a separate identity for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. SC, STs. It's not SC/ST. It's not SC, ST. But unfortunately, as people in India believe in militant, isolated representations, these things have led to subcasteization, subcaste militant representations, losing their objective of winning the mainstream society, losing their objective of winning the ideological battle or cultural battle against the invaded communities. So, I mean, I think Acharya Nagarjuna University and the Department of English has to be considered as the center for evolving the concept of fourth world identity. So the very, term fourth world literatures, of course, it was already there. Fourth world literatures was already used, and in the volumes that we have brought out, in the introduction itself, we gave the information to the people to understand clearly. So I'm again going into the fundamental details of fourth world literatures and fourth world identity for the sake of the participants who find this concept as a new concept. So it was George Manuel who introduced the concept, the fourth world, to describe indigenous minorities throughout the world. He was assisted by Michael Poslam in co-authoring a book, The Fourth Way in Indian Reality. This book was in the year 1974. And this was taken as a cue by Adam Shoemaker, who wrote Black Words, White Page, Aboriginal Literature from 1929 to 1988, establishing Aboriginal literature of Australia as fourth world literature. And this was also followed in America by Gordon Brotherston in the Book of the Fourth World, reading the Native Americas through their literature in the year, I think, 1892. And then you have series of books that came in this way, proclaiming a separate literary identity or a separate literary lineage of their literatures. So in Canada, You have Penny Patron coming out with native literature in Canada. Leslie Monkman coming with native heritage images of Indian and English Canadian literature. And W.H. New, native writers and Canadian writing. And a series of literary works that try to substantiate fourth world identity. I think this is apart from the mainstream Canadian literature written by American Canadian writers or French Canadian writers or British Canadian writers or Jewish Canadian writers or South Asian Canadian writers. Apart from the mainstream writings in Canadian literature by these groups, there is a significant literary stream that continues to exist even now by native Canadian writers. And these are the fundamental books that gave us a comprehensive understanding of native Canadian writers. I think among the native Canadian writers, I think all these names are familiar and well known to the scholars and students. You have Thomas King, you have Lee Maracle, who visited our university during 2012 conference, Thompson Highway, Janet Armstrong, Maria Campbell, Drew Hayden Taylor, Basil H. Johnson, Daniel Heath Justice, and Paula Gunn Allen. All these people are from native Canada. I mean, they're native Canadian writers. And apart from the mainstream American literature, like as we always study with Robert Frost and Walt Whitman and Emerson or Hemingway, all these, apart from these writers, mainstream American writers, there are also very strong Native American writers who are writing very seriously. As I mentioned, the present generation of Robert Warrior, Craig Womack, etc., etc. You have other writers like Louis Ehrich, James Welch, Leslie Mormon Silko, of course, N. Scott Momaday was already popular. You have Louis Owens, and you have Arnold Copart. Okay, all these writers are giving even now they are giving a separate Native American identity. So it is a literary nationalism, a separate literary nationalism and cultural nationalism, okay, which comes under fourth world literatures. So this literary nationalism found in the writings of the fourth world writers do not have borders. It do not have a map. The only map is the literary map. The only mindscape is the unification. It is only in mind, through your mind, it is only through your imagination, it is only with the power of your imagination you identify yourself with the social, political, and cultural conditions of, you identify yourself with the social, political, and cultural conditions of Native Americans, Native Canadians, and Australian Aboriginals. I mean, it's not a crime to identify yourself mentally with those victimized races, with those victimized people. It's a kind of unification of identity, or it's an attempt by the humanity to transcend the boundaries of militant, isolated caste, subcaste identities. I think that's where the fourth world literatures comes out with the proclamation of universalism. The title of the seminar is Universalism and Ancient Wisdom. Okay, fourth world literature stands for universalism. Fourth world literature do not stand for Inuit identity or Chippewa identity or Cherokee identity or the subcasteist Dalit identities, which are very much prevalent right now in India, and segmented identities. I think way back in 1917, 1920s itself, we found, Rabindranath Tagore talking about universalism, universal identity. Literature universalizes every human being. Literature circumscribes every human being. And we also often talk about Goronja Suwas, Viswanarudu, and Visvajaninata. I believe this proclamation of these universal identities are possible only through fourth world literature. Because by reading fourth world literatures, you transcend the boundaries of your nation, boundaries of your society, boundaries of your caste, community, color, creed, etc., 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 etc. So I think so. The fourth world literatures has brought in the dire necessity of understanding the significance of the problem of indigeneity. Okay. As the director of the seminar has mentioned, ethnicity, indigeneity are the problems which are being talked about. I think 21st century is the century of identifying ethnic tribes, identifying indigenous people, consolidating indigenous people. As per the UNO's attempts and as per the UNO resolutions, 21st century is considered to be the century of indigenous tribes, indigenous groups spread across the world, So, I mean, literature which has been systematically talking about the parallel readings between race and caste, the problems the problems experienced by the Africans in America, or the problem of apartheid in South Africa, or wherever race is considered to be playing a dominant role in discriminating the people, or theorization of aspect of race by post-colonial critics. Theorization of aspect of race by the post-colonial critics are proving to be incomplete when we do not add this problem of finding out indigeneity as an important problem to be tackled by literature. But of course, it is also the problem of the indigenous people in not properly representing their own problems in international organizations and international bodies. I think one of the readings as to why the caste is so ferocious in India is that India never reveals to the world that it has a problem of caste. Indians always say that the problem of caste is internal and that will be solved through slow process of democratization. And India never allows its representatives to represent the issue of the problem of caste either in UNO or in any international bodies or organizations. And for that matter, India has not made any attempt to make the world understand that the problem of caste is as serious problem of race, as seriously as the problem of race, and it need to be obliterated. In the case of Africans, they wrote poetry, they wrote fiction, they constructed their own literature. I mean, making racial discrimination as the central theme of their literature. In the case of Afro-Americans, they made racial discrimination as a central theme, as a centrality of their literature, and made the whole world to understand the problem of the racial discrimination. And they are coming to the extent of trying to say now the whole world got away with the problem of racial discrimination, except the stray incidents like the recent killings of black people, where they came out with the movement Black Lives Matter, where they came out with the movement Black Lives Matter. Except these few incidents, I think America has come to the stage of proclaiming that it is devoid of racial discrimination. But of course, still racial discrimination matters in America. And Canada, though it is considered to be a racist nation, it has also come to the point of declaring that it is a race-free nation. Australia, when you look at Australia, every time when a new Australian Prime Minister takes oath, he offers a kind of apology to the entire nation for the past crimes committed on the Aboriginal people. By apologizing to the nation, by apologizing to the Aboriginal people, every Australian Prime Minister begins his administration on the day of his oath. which means no, their nations are completely aware of the past history. Their nations are completely in understanding of what went wrong in their past history. And their nations are ready to acknowledge the crimes committed by their people on the victimized groups or on the discriminated people. Whereas it's completely a different situation in India, as India fears to invite the intervention of the outside intellectuals or outside organizations to deal with the problem of caste. Problem of caste even today remains to be the serious problem. So I'm just making a constructive comparison between the problem of caste and the problem of indigeneity. Away from the traditional parallel readings that went on unabatedly till today between the problem of race and the problem of caste, racial discrimination and caste discrimination. Race to some extent is wiped out. Racial discrimination is to some extent wiped out. I think Germany is no more a Germany as it used to be in the First World War and Second World War. Austria is no more an Austria as it butchered the Jewish people during the First World War and Second World War. Poland is no more the racist nation as it had the history of butchering countless Jewish people during the First World War and Second World War. Okay. So every nation tried its best to cleanse itself from the past crimes committed by their own people, on their own people, okay, in the name of race or something. So to that extent, I think literary theory also offered a substantiative explanations and illustrations, and a kind of intellectual detour was offered by literary theory also. I think we only talk about all the time Fanon's, Edward Said's, or all these post-colonial theoretical propositions. To what extent Fanon has exposed the psychoanalytic reading of racial discrimination, and to what extent Edward Said has exposed the process of othering, how the othering took place. That's what we find in Orientalism and Culture and Imperialism, and in many of his theoretical works. We have After Orientalism also, a book by Edward Said. Okay, I think one of the critics who criticized Edward Said's Orientalism came out with After Orientalism. I'm just unable to recall the name of the critic. So I think the entire literary critical stuff is loaded to free the Western society from racial discrimination. And to that extent, we do not find literary criticism trying to relieve the Indian society from the burden of caste identity, from the burden of caste discrimination. So the problem of indigeneity remains in the West completely, because indigenous people do not get proper representation. Indigenous people's demonstrations, representations, be it through literature and culture, are completely marred by the demonstrations of Afro-American people. I think if you try to understand who participated more in number in the recent Afro-American demonstrations in the movement of Black Lives Matter, I think First Nations of America, natives of America have participated in good number. Natives of America have participated in good number. It's not exclusively an Afro-American street protest or demonstrations that shook the Trump administration recently. They were, assisted and directly participated by the indigenous groups, Because when we read the failure of racial, counter-racial revolutions, we try to understand that what some critics have said as far as Native American cultural revolution is concerned are true. So I'm just drawing your attention to the work written by Wayne Deloria. So Wayne Deloria is a Native American critic, almost as strong as Frank Fanon, but we don't have the evidence of Wayne Deloria being taught in the departments of English as part of literary theory. So he wrote a book, Custer Died for Your Sins. This Custer, I think it is considered to be an intellectual manifestation, almost on the lines of Fanon's Wretched of the Earth or Fanon's Black Skin, White Masks. So this Custer is an American general, a military general who killed natives. I mean, who killed natives and who was killed by the Native American warriors in one of the wars. Okay. So in this book, he criticizes the Afro-American literary and cultural movement and considers the Afro-American literary and cultural movement as a total failure because it is its objective is only to offer temporary solutions for the identity of the Afro-Americans. Okay. I'll just read out from the article that I wrote and published in our own journal, the Cultural and Literary Nationalism of Fourth World. So in this article, I made a comparison between Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste and Deloria's Custer Died for Your Sins. But I don't want you to understand Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste here, but I want you to understand, Deloria's Custer Died for Our Sins. I mean, where we went wrong in trying to understand the parallel readings between indigenous groups and Dalit groups in India. Deloria's Custer Died for Your Sins is a social and cultural revelation about the natives, aborigines, and First Nations. He presents a spectroscopic analysis of the past history and the present social, political, and cultural status of natives. In the late 60s, American society had not heard the voices and representations of American Indians. Late 60s, exactly the time when civil rights movement was going on by, Martin Luther King. America was embroiled in civil rights movement and anti-war protests. The emergence of the voices of natives was a relief for the American society, but was short-lived. Exactly when Afro-Americans were making civil rights movement under the leadership of Martin Luther King, there were also protests by Native Americans. The mainstream American society was, satisfied with the protests of the Native American society because it don't want the civil rights to become such, such a rage in American society. So they thought that with the Native American movement, the civil rights movement will be submerged. The emergence of the voices of natives was a relief for the American society, but was short-lived. So the Native American society was arguing for the tribal sovereignty. They were arguing for a Bureau of Indian Affairs to be encouraged. And they were arguing for American Indian Policy Review Commission, while Afro-Americans were only fighting for the taking away of the discriminatory rules in the name of race. So the efforts of this commission has spawned into anti-Indian groups who agitated for the complete abrogation of special tribal status. I think they were arguing for special tribal status. Their problems need to be reviewed from the commissions established by America, and their problems should be addressed, they should be represented by American Indian Policy Review Commission. Okay. So Deloria here, he compares natives with weather. Weather is unpredictable and cannot be changed by the people. Likewise, the world counts the unpredictability of the natives. The plight of natives is transparent to the rest of the world. Natives are forced to defend their lives from the onslaught of public perceptions. To be native in contemporary American society is to be unreal and ahistorical because natives are devoid of history, and they were devoid of, realistic representations. So ridiculing the public perceptions and understanding natives, Deloria says that understanding Indians is not an esoteric art. Even today, they remain to be the subject of understanding and easy knowledge about Indians as far as historical tradition is considered. While Afro-Americans and other races were recognized as species of human beings by the amendments of the Constitution, it took long time for Americans to discover natives as people. Even today, natives were not considered as people. Unlike the blacks, natives were never slaves. I mean, to understand the comparison between the natives and Afro-Americans or the black people, they were in possession of large tracts of land and abundant resources of nature. As you know, the land was completely in their hands, and the natives or the tribes or the original inhabitants, they were in complete possession of the abundant resources of the nature. So the failure of the policies in accommodating blacks and natives resulted in civil rights movement. Natives withdrew from the overtures of white society and rejected the white perceptions of life and culture. So, I mean, in the process of appropriation, in the process of accommodation, natives in America have refused to oblige the policies of assimilation, whereas the black people have, accepted the policies of assimilation. So the white world of abstract symbols became a nightmare for the natives. Deloria is talking about the representation of natives in mainstream culture, just as blacks were represented as erotic people or as pathological dangers. Natives were also represented as, irrational people. They were represented as comic figures, and they were represented as barbarians. Afro-Americans got away from these representations to some extent by inserting themselves into the mainstream American society, whereas the natives have withdrawn from accepting the assimilation of policies of the Americans, and they still remain to be, different historical tribal groups located in different parts of America. As they are always associated with the nature, they are always associated with the land, they are always associated with the sovereignty of the tribes. American policies have failed to assure the recognition of their sovereignty. Of course, there were many treaties in the process of defeating different groups in America. There were many treaties by the mainstream Americans, and all these treaties were made. They were welcomed in the beginning, but later they were violated. So in the process of the violation, they found that Native Americans were slowly confined to their own places. I think the problem of reservations of the land is related to the natives. Mainstream Americans, after defeating the natives, they confined the mobility of the natives to some tracts, and they called these tracts as reserves. And these reserves were fenced, and Native Americans were not allowed to cross these fenced reserves. And whatever has to be used by the Native Americans, whatever has to be lived by the Native Americans, it need to be lived only within those reserved land tracts. So hence they were called as reserved people. So in American situation, land was reserved, and Indian situation, understanding the problems, if the land was reserved for Dalits, Ambedkar has not asked for reservation in the land. Ambedkar has asked for reservation in education and employment opportunities. Though there was a reservation for Native Americans in Canada and America in employment opportunities and educational institutions, the prime chunk of reservation is given to them only in the land. But they were asked not to move from those lands. And all those lands were fenced. And sometimes those fences were with electricity. So most of the Native Americans and Native Canadians died while crossing the fenced borders. And you all know the war strategies or the strategies of elimination adopted by mainstream Canadians and mainstream Americans. So the water reservoirs from where the natives used to draw water were poisoned, or the trees or the fruits from where the natives used to eat, they were poisoned. So they have adopted different techniques in completely eliminating the native groups in America and Canada. I mean, of course, the process of assimilation was already there. They were offering education. They were inviting these natives and aborigines to get themselves educated on model lines. And there were schools started to educate the natives, to educate the aboriginals. I mean, the residential school system was first implemented in America and Canada for the sake of educating the native people. So these native people, when they are completely detached from their own natural living standards, their own natural culture, their own culture, they found it very difficult to survive in the residential school systems. So the experiences of residential school system proved to be one of the important subjects in literature also, in native literature and in Native American and Native Canadian literature. So I mean, Deloria, he talks about the dire necessity in comparing the indigenous problem with the caste problem in India. Okay, but of course that is our attention here. So he draws social dissimilarities between blacks and natives. Natives are dealt directly by the federal government. Native leadership falls into legal pattern. Natives have the opportunity to deal with the rest of the world as a corporate body. On the other hand, blacks are defined within their community. Black leadership often depends on newspaper coverage. They are the subjects of law and order imposed externally. Natives have the possibility of total withdrawal from the society because of the special legal status. Deloria is of the view that the blacks should have permanent homeland for integration. The world of the whites is torn because of the absence of permanent land, and they have mortgaged their future with a distorted past. They need historical participation as people, or else their survival will be in crisis. To save the world from this crisis, white mythologies need to be dissolved. Native myths must be re-examined and clarified. Natives and blacks must not oppose each other, because mainstream American society always posits blacks and natives against one another. So they are considered as two opposing forces. It should be an amalgamation of new culture. It should be a coalition of minority groups to represent the rights of the people. Natives will refuse to work with a general ideological basis. Any united representation of minorities must come to terms with tribalism/nativism. The future depends on understanding Indian/native nationalism by the whites and the blacks. Leaving the wild status, the natives will not revert to world culture. More realistic representation and a possible solution can be arrived through the understanding of native nationalism. Yeah. So the comparison between the natives and the blacks by Wayne Deloria in Custer Died for Our Sins, Custer Died for Your Sins, makes me or made me to understand, to establish the comparison between the natives and the Dalits of India. I think that's where we are making a parallel study of the natives in America and Dalits in India. The usual traditional understanding is Dalits are compared with Afro-Americans. Dalits in India are compared with the Africans. I think that's how literature went on. Okay, as I told you in the beginning. But with the emergence of fourth world literature, you find a kind of literary nationalism, a kind of literary and cultural nationalism, circumscribing, in the sense mapping, or in the sense encircling all the discriminated races across the world. So that's where the sagacity of fourth world literature comes in, the justification of fourth world literature comes in. Of course, I don't have to give you the fundamental information. First world is the world of Europeans and Americans. The second world is the world of Russia and its allied nations that believed in communist ideology. Third world is the world of third world countries that had colonial or colonized administration and colonized experience. Fourth world is the world of the natives, natives across the world. Okay, I think there are natives in Russia also. There are Aboriginal people in Poland also. There are Aboriginal people in Austria also. But of course, we only talk about, as far as literary representation is concerned, we only talk about natives in America, First Nations in Canada, Aboriginals in Australia, and Maoris in New Zealand, and some other recognized races. So in the process of extending fourth world identity to Dalits, we need to talk about the Dalit diaspora. Okay. I mean, if you go by the etymological sense of the word Dalit, we understand Dalit is an ideological term. It does not connote or denote caste identity. But unfortunately, in today's political usage, the word is being used in relation to caste and in relation to subcaste. Okay. But when we look at the dispersal of Dalits, or when you look at the dismemberment of Dalits, we have to understand Dalits are very much present even in England. They are present in Pakistan. They are present in Bangladesh. They are present in Ceylon. They are present in many South Asian nations. So almost like a native identity, you find Dalit identity spreading itself, spreading across the world. You have presence of Dalits in almost 56 countries. But of course, they do not proclaim their identity. We don't want them to proclaim their identity living there, but then they should be in complete awareness of their identity. So the parallel reading is between the natives, who are considered to be the universal citizens, who are considered to be the carriers of universalism, and between Dalits, who are considered to be the people living in almost every nation. You find Dalits everywhere, not by caste and subcaste. Again, let me recall you to the stupidity of our thinking. Okay. So the stupidity of our thinking immediately draws us to find out if somebody comes out in the proclamation of Dalit identity, somehow or the other, how consciously or unconsciously, we will try to identify the subcaste background. That is nothing but the downfall of the human thinking. Okay. So when Gurram Joshua is found to be talking about Viswa Narudu and Viswa Janinata, when Ambedkar is, making us to cross the borders of the caste with your power of education and with the power of intellectualism, and to acquire a proclaimed ideological identity in the name of Dalit status, we again retreat to the original identity. Okay. I think this is being strictly followed by the educated people. So unless and until we conquer the boundaries of the subcaste identity and identify ourselves with the aboriginal, with the native identities, and find our resonances, cultural resonances or cultural reflections or social victimized reflective positions in Afro-Americans or in the victimized races or in native people, we will never be able to liberate ourselves mentally. We can never be part of fourth world literatures unless and until we conquer ourselves with the power of imagination, the subcasteist militant identities. But of course, that comes through reading. I think any researcher, any academician who reads Australian Aboriginal literature will find his life. Okay. Anyone who reads a Native American novel will find his life, will find the reflection of his life. I think the Dalits in India are associated with the land. Dalits in India are associated with the nature. They are the people of the land, but they are the people without any land. They are landless people. As natives have become the landless people, as native Canadians driven from the land, driven out from the land. Yeah. It's done? Yeah. So if you examine the history of farming, the history of cultivation, who has brought the land into cultivation? It's the aboriginal groups, it's the native groups. The cultivated land was occupied by the invaders, and these people were driven from their cultivated tracts, driven out from their cultivated tracts. So after being driven out from their cultivated tracts, again they brought, that land into cultivation. Again they were driven out. Further and further they brought the land under cultivation, because they know how to love the land, how to adore the land, because the land is the psyche of the mind of the indigenous people. The nature reflects the psyche of the mind of the indigenous people. So taking the natives away from the nature, or taking Dalits away from the land, or away from the forest dwelling places, is like dislocating them physically, is like weakening them, is like bringing them down psychologically. Okay, so these parallel studies were being made. Nature, Dalits / natives. Forest, Dalits / natives. Culture / nature / nature, Dalits, etc., etc. Okay, so I think you have a very important book written by Arnold Kropot, Ethnocriticism. Okay, I mean, this stands in parallel line to the post-colonial critical books, Arnold Kropot's Ethnocriticism. And you also have a very important book by Terry Goldie, Fear and Temptation, where every aspect of the lives of the natives and indigenous people is presented in the form of literature. I think he gives a long list of the writers, how natives were presented in the nature, in literature, how the natives were presented as forest dwelling people, and what's the poetry, what's the fiction, and what's the drama that was created by these people. So there are good number of books, but the only thing is they are not being read, they are not being considered. So it is high time that the departments of English in all the universities recognize and consider fourth world literature as a significant form of literature, because English departments, by adopting Dalit literature, by teaching Dalit literature, or by keeping Dalit texts as part of academic curriculum, they have already surpassed the boundaries of Dalit literature. So the only literature which need to be, accommodated, which need to be, taken into fold by the departments English, by the departments of English across India, is native literature. I think without knowing the natives, no nation can proclaim itself as a nation. No human being can proclaim that he is a human being without knowing the natives. No nationalism can be complete of any nation without trying to understand the foundations for nationalism. Okay. So I think I have made enough of my presentation with my confusion, because I'm completely away from my academic track since 1 year. And I thank Dr. Koteswara for giving me an opportunity in retrieving the rudiments of the literary information related to fourth world literatures. So from now onwards, I'll find time to speak only on native literatures, be it Native America or Native Canadian literature, and I'll stop, making people to understand the significance of Dalit literature, because I have done enough on Dalit literature through several lectures. As I already told you, Dalit literature has become mainstream literature in many of the departments of English. Enough of research is done, enough of teaching is done in Dalit literature, and then stream of Dalit novels and Dalit poetry which is coming, I think is making its mark. We cannot get away without Dalit literature. Our knowledge cannot be complete without the knowledge of Dalit literature. But our knowledge of literature remains to be incomplete without the knowledge of native literature. So it is high time that we transcend the boundaries of Dalit identity and acquire native and aboriginal and indigenous identity and become a universal citizen. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. I believe that people, or the participants and the students and scholars will understand the objective of my lecture, the spirit behind my attempts of crossing the boundaries of subcaste identities and Dalit identities, which naturally paves the way for acquiring universal identity, whereby you bring back the ancient wisdom of our ancient forefathers who really began this civilization. Okay, I think we already argued that the Indus Valley, the first people of India's Indus Valley civilizations are Dalits. Okay, it is Dalits who began Indus Valley civilization. But of course, it is an ideological application and it's like ideological proclamation also. So if you get back to the beginnings of ancient civilization, we understand that Dalits or natives or aborigines are all one and the same. They all belong to one fraction of humanity, single fraction of humanity. It is from single fraction of humanity we have proliferated, we have multiplied, and we have amplified our identities, whereby we are being defeated by material and cultural forces. Okay, so in order to withstand the onslaught of materialism, onslaught of cultural materialism, we need to proclaim the universal identity, drawing inspiration from the ancient wisdom, and by proclaiming universal identity, which is an essential identity to be proclaimed. That's the only solution for the survival of the humanity. So thank you very much, Dr. Kodesaro. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving fruitful and informative inputs. Your session is very, very informative. I think the participants might get a lot of information regarding fourth world literature. It's my pleasure inviting you, sir, to talk about the ancient wisdom and universalism in fourth world literatures. I once again thank you, Professor Rajshekhar, sir, Professor Department of English, Acharya Nagarjuna University, and Vice Chancellor of Nagarjuna University. And sir brought to us notice many important issues regarding fourth world literature and all theoretical considerations of major theories in order to understand what is actually fourth world literature. Of course, the fourth world, the natives, how the natives have been divisible and multiplied in many castes and races across the world. And nationalism, how the concept of nationalism is fulfilled and when it is fulfilled. Sir, thanks a lot for enlightening us with your speech. And in particular, in case of India, how...
Yeah, Dr. Kodesaro, please, please allow me to make a small announcement. Next year, from in 2021, we will be celebrating 10 years of completion, 10 years completion of fourth world literatures in Acharya Nagarjuna University. Okay. I think we have conducted a global seminar in 2012 and in 2015. As I said, we began this study of fourth world literatures in 2009, and we are expected to complete or celebrate the completion of a decade of fourth world literatures last year itself, in 2009 itself, but they were postponed due to the reasons known to everybody. And this year, completely engulfed by coronavirus, we couldn't go ahead with that celebration. Next year, we will definitely complete the 10 years of the completion of fourth world literatures as a subject or as an area to be studied, or as an area that was already initiated and researched and studied at Acharya Nagarjuna University by the distinguished students and scholars of our university. Okay, so next year, it's a small announcement. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for giving your valuable time.
So Dr. Kodesaro, kindly permit me to leave. I need to attend another meeting.
Sure, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
So I thank all the participants and I thank all the students and scholars. I thank you specially, and I thank your university particularly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So let me complete my a few remarks about the Professor Rajshekhar sir's talk. And in case of race, how Africans or African writers, how they incorporate their problem of race in their later works of art, and how it is not being incorporated in case of India. So how the race, sir also talked about the race-free nations and the nations which are not from race. In this regard, sir brought to our notice the importance of the Orientalism, or the concept of Orientalism and then Occidentalism. How Orientalism and Occidentalism made Europe or West free from a race. But in case of India, how it is not incorporated Indian literary works of art in particular. So as part of such a speech, how natives are eliminated by non-natives, how natives are closely associated to nature in particular, because I talked about the ancient wisdom and universalism. Sir explored a great many facts and a great many truths of natives, how natives are very closely associated and attached to the nature and so on and so forth. So in this regard, Sir made a distinction between natives and blacks, how natives are still are very far away from the mainstream society, and how blacks overcame their blackness or race, something or the other, right? So finally, Sir brought to our notice that when nationalism is complete in any of the nations, when natives in particular are aborigines, or when natives are aborigines across the globe or across the world, when they are incorporated in the mainstream, then only the concept of nationalism is complete in any of the nations. Thank you, sir. Well, thank you. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Professor Rajshekhar sir, Professor of English Department of English Arts at Nagarjuna University, for giving his valuable time and giving us valuable inputs and information. Sir's session is very, very informative, and sir, it's really all the participants. I hope and I expect all the participants learned and got many great insights from this art session. Thank you, all the participants once again. And due to the hectic schedule of Professor Rajshekhar sir, today's question session is cancelled. And very soon I'll send you the feedback link. Please, all the participants, please fill your feedback. With this, I would like to conclude my remarks. I would like to do a vote of thanks now. It's my immense pleasure, and I would like to thank, I am really indebted to Professor K.B. Chandrasekhar sir, Vice Chancellor of Krishna University, for encouraging me in a great detail, and particularly encouraging the Department of English for organizing webinars like this. And without his support, and without the support of the registrar and the hierarchy of the Krishna University, this webinar may not be materialized. Thank you once again. Thank you all. Thank you all the participants, and thank you all the administrators of Krishna University for encouraging me and encouraging the Department of English for conducting and giving me such a wonderful opportunity to organize this seminar. Thank you one and all, and thank you so much, and meeting you tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. For Professor Armstrong sir's class lecture on second 2 days national webinar. Thank you, sir. Thank you all the participants once again. Please fill the feedback link. All those who fill the feedback link only will get the attendance certificate. Thank you so much. Thank you once again.